Hello, welcome to lesson 4 of the tutorial series on the design and implementation of Soccer League Transfer Portal using server-side Blazor. I'm Benjamin Fadino. Now, in this lesson, we are going to implement the login page. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, because I've just restarted my computer, is to check that my SQL Server service is running. So I'll go to Services, click on Services. Now I'll look for the SQL Server instance called Ibukonlua. Okay, it is running. Now the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to start Radzen. So I right click on Radzen, then I'll click on Open. So I'll click on our project to open it. So I click on it, close this window. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to add a new page. So I'll click on this link to create a new page. So I'll say create new page. So I'll say prod pages and I'll click next. Now the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to select the schema for the new page. Now the schema for the new page is user. I'll call the new page name login. Now the layout I'm going to use for the new page will be login instead of main. I'm going to uncheck this, the edit and add pages. I'm going to uncheck the open, edit and add pages in dialog. Let me just include the user in rows. Then I'll click next. Then I'll click next. I'll click next. Then I'll click save. Now after doing that, the following pages were generated by Radzen. The first page that was generated is the add login page. This is how it looks. The next page that was generated is the edit login page. This is how it looks. And the last page that was generated is the login page, which is actually a list page. Now, I don't want to use the edit login page, so I'll select the edit login page. I'll select it in Radzen. You can see it's selected. I'll right click on it and I'll say delete. A message comes up. You will permanently delete page edit login. So I say okay. I go to the list page currently called login right now. I'll right click on it. I'll click on delete. It says you permanently delete page login. I'll say okay. Now the next order of business for me is that I will go to the page called add login. I'll right click on it again. And this time around, instead of deleting, I will select properties. Then I will change the name of the page from add login to login. Then I will click save. Now there is an issue I've just observed. From the layout of the login page, I've just observed that there is no relationship between users and teams. Because if there was any relationship between users and teams, team ID here will have been generated as a drop-down instead of the text box that it currently is. So I'm going to fix this issue before I continue. So in order to fix this issue, I'm going to open SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm going to connect to the SQL Server instance called Ibukunlua on my local machine. My login is SA and my password are private to me. I'm logging in using SQL Server authentication. So I click connect. Now that I'm connected to SQL Server, the next thing I'm going to do is to expand the databases folder. I will expand my database node. The database I'm currently working on is called Soccer League TB. So I expand it. I expand tables. Then I right click on users table. Sorry. I'll right click on users tables. Then I'll click on design. After clicking on design, so this table ID. Now the table ID, I want the data type to be integer. Uh, Now it's possible for a user not to have a team, so I'm going to allow no. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to right click on the table anywhere, then I click on relationships. Then I'll click on add. Then I'll go to tables and column specification. I'll click the ellipsis by the right. Now I'll select as my primary key table club details. My primary key column will be team ID. My foreign key table is users, and my foreign key column will also be team ID. Then I'll click on OK. Then I click on close. I'll right click on the table design view. Then I'll click save users. The following tables will be saved to your database. Do you want to continue? Then I'll say yes. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to tell Radzen that the schema of the table users has changed. So how am I going to tell Radzen that the schema of that table has changed? I'll go to Radzen. I'll click on data. I'll click on the con data. What I did was to take it again. Let me click cancel. To take it again, let me open the application again. What I did was I went to data. Then I clicked on con data. So it opened it. Then I'm going to say infer schema. You can see the table selection is somewhat grayed out. This is Radzen's way of telling you that some schema has changed. So I'm going to click it so that it will become white again. Then I click on finish. I go to my applications. I'll open the application again, then I will click on run. So Radzen has discovered an error, and the error is in the page login.razor. Now this error occurred because of the change that I've made to the table schema. This error is occurring because of the change that I've made to the table schema. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop Radzen. I'll right click on the login page. I'll say delete. Then I click OK to delete it. So I'll now go to pages. I'll click on create new page. I'll select front pages. I'll click text. My schema as before will be user, page name will be login. I don't want to open, edit, and add pages in dialog. My layout will be login. I'm going to include users in rows and club details. Let me click next. Let me click next. Let me click save. So I'll right click on edit login page. I say delete. I'll right click on login page and I say delete. Click OK. Now I'll also right click on add login page, but this time around I'll select properties. I will change the name of add login page to login. Then I'll click save. Now I'll click on the heading for the add login page. I'll change the heading from add login. I'll change it to login. The changes is not being reflected. Now what I will do so that the changes can be seen is let me just navigate to another page. Let me just go to another page. So let me click on add user. Now I'm going to go back to my login page. It's now reflected. Now I want the heading to be centralized. So I'll go to style. I will change text align from left to center. Okay, changes is not being seen. So I'll click on, I will select genders page and go back to login page. Now you can see the changes is centralized. Now on the login page, I don't need the drop down for club details. I don't need it. Now what I will do is I'll go to outline and I'm going to select the row that contains the drop down. I'll right click on it, then I'll click on delete. The changes are not being seen yet, so I navigate away, navigate back. It's done. Now the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to select the button whose caption is saved right now. I'll go to properties. I'll change the text to login. I don't want any icon to be there, so I'll clear the save icon away. Let me move away from the page briefly and come back. See, let me change this text to sign in instead of login. Sign in. Now, it is time to write some C# code. But before we do that, let's look at some of the code that Radzen has generated for the page load event of this login page in Radzen. Now, in order to do that, I'll go to outline. I'll click on page. Then I'll select events. Now, when you look at now, these are the code that Radzen has generated for the load event. Now, in order for me to see it in steps, I'll click on this handle the load event icon. So I click on it. So I see that the first procedure is that Radzen was getting club the list of all clubs from the data service. I don't need this again, so I'm going to delete that. Now I'm left with just one step in the load event handler. And in that one step, we are creating a page property whose name is user. And the value is a new user object. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to open Visual Studio. Now, how do I open Visual Studio? I'll go to my applications, then I will click on Show Application Directory for this Soccer League Transfer app. Then this is the Visual Studio solution file. I'll double click on it to open it in Visual Studio. So now I've opened it in Visual Studio. I'll go to Solution Explorer. Now, inside my Pages folder, I'll look for the login page. The name of the login page is login.razor. I will expand it. Now let's go to login razor.designer.cs for a moment. Here is the load event that we saw earlier in the designer. This is the way it was implemented in the designer. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I want to implement the reset form functionality. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to click on double click on login.razor.cs. So I'm going to implement a private method, a private asynchronous method. I'll say private async tag reset form. Is actually a method to clear form values. So in this method, all I'm going to say is I'm going to say my user object will be equal to new models.conData.user. Now, the next thing I'm going to do will be to hook up this new method I've created to my cancel button. So I'll go back to Radzen. I will open the application. I'll look for the login page. I'll click on cancel button. I'll go to events. I will click on undo the click event. Right now, there is just one event, which is a navigate to page event. I don't want it, so I'll click on delete. Now I'll click on the plus button to add an event handler for the click event. Select action type will be execute C#. Now, in order to execute this C#, I'll be calling this method reset form. So I will now say await reset form. And I click done. Now you can see now that reset form has one reference. Now the next order of business will be to undo the submit event for the entire form. Now, when I go to outline, I'm going to outline and I click on form 0, which is the form ID, and I go to events. Right now, and I go to undo the submit event. The first procedure is that a new user is being created. I don't want that, so I'll delete it. I'll click done for now. I'm going back to this login.razor.cs. Now in this login.razor.cs, I'm going to implement another custom method here. Private async task validate user. Method, this is actually method to log in user. Now, let's look at some things. When I click, I'm going to click on the text box for username. I'll go to properties. Now you can see that right now this text box is bound to the user.username property. Now I go to password, which is actually a text box. Now this password is not meant to be a text box. It's meant to be a password control. So I'll delete it. I'm also going to Radzen's closed for some time. So I'm going to start Radzen again. So I click on Radzen, I say open. I will open my app. I'll click on login. I'll click on the required password validator. I'll delete it as well. I'm navigating away. I navigate back. Now I'll go to toolbox. I'll look for password. I drop it here. I drop it in the column. I'll go to style. I'm changing the width to 100%. Now for the text box for username, I don't want it to autocomplete, so I will uncheck autocomplete. Now the new password control I've just created. I'm going to bind it to dollar open parenthesis user dot password close parenthesis. Then I'm going to bring back, and then I'm changing the name of the password control to password. Then I'll go back to toolbox. I'll search for validator. So I'll click on required validator. I'll drag it and place it after the password control. I'll click on it in Designer. I'm going to associate it with the password component. And then the text will be password is required. Let me briefly navigate away from the login page so that I can see the change. So I navigate back. So I'm this new change. Now I go back to Visual Studio. So I was creating a method to log in user. Now I'm going to Solution Explorer. Now data service is the service that Radzen has generated to fetch data to and from the database. I want to customize this service. And in order for me to customize this service, I'll right click on So in order for me to customize this service, I'll right click on services folder. I'll say add, then I'll select class. I'm going to call this class ondataservice.custom.cs. Then I'll click on add. Now, the namespace for the original Condata service generated by Radzen is Soccer League Transfer App. So the customized class I'm creating, I will also make sure that the namespace for it is Soccer League Transfer App. So I'm going to remove this dot services. Let me save everything I have. Then I'm going to put partial attribute here. So a public partial class Condata service. So I change again. This is my way of telling C# compiler that the class definition of this Condata service is spread across several files. So we have method 2, validate user. Takes in two parameters. Username and password. So public async task user validate user. String username, comma, string password. So let me just say var user equals to new user. So let me now say return await the task from result user. So now I'm going to say var user1 is equal to context dot users dot first or default p dot username, so excuse me, p dot username equals input parameter username and p dot password equals input parameter password. If user1 is not equal to null, then set user to user1. That is that. Now there was something I forgot to do in the last lesson, that is in lesson 3, and that was to register my custom authentication provider class in the startup.cs file. So I'm going to go to Solution Explorer. I'll open startup.cs and in configure services method, after the line that says services.add Blazor session storage, I'm going to add this line that says services.add scope authentication state provider, custom authentication state provider. In other words, I'm telling Radzen that my implementation of authentication state provider is the custom class that I created in the last lesson, whose name is custom authentication state provider. Now, to undo the red line, I will say I will import using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Components.Authorization. So that takes care of that. I'll click on Save All. Now, back to the login business. Let me change the name of this method in login.razor2 sign in user. So it's still method to login user. So first thing, call validate user method in the service layer. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to say var my user equals on data service is equals con data dot validate user. My user object dot username, comma, my user object dot password. Now, if my user dot let me await. So await for data dot validate user. So now, if my user dot user ID is greater than 0, so here I'm checking if user exists. If the data, if user was found, I'm checking if user was found in the data store. So if user was found in the data store, now get user rows list. Now, how do we get user rows list? Say var rows. Oh, okay. I'll say list of string rows list equals await data dot moik get rows list. My user dot user ID. Now, this method does not yet exist. So what I'll do is I'll say generate method. Now, after the method has been generated, I'll say go to definition. Here you have this method that's generated. So I'm going to change this to public. Now, this method was generated in the in the file that Radzen generated for the service layer. If I leave it here, the next time I generate the app using Radzen, this method will be cleaned by Radzen. So I don't want that. So I'll say Control X. I will look for my on data service.custom.cs. I'll put in the method here. Now, the next order of business is to go back to SQL Server and create a stored procedure that will get rows list for me. So I'll right click on Soccer League DB. Say new query. So I'll say create procedure. Get user rows. It will take as an input parameter the user ID whose data type is int. Say as. Then I'll right click. I'll click on design query in editor. Oh, it's not cooperating yet. Okay, let me first say select star from. Let me drag and drop users in rows. Then I'll right click on the select star from users in rows that I've just done. Say design query in editor. Okay, I'll right click again, say add table. Oh, still not cooperating. Okay, let me just say from users in row, let me say cross join. Users. Let me just say cross join rows. Let me change this one to select star from user in rows. Now let me now select everything. All right, click again. Design query in editor. Okay. So let me bring user in rows in the middle. Now I'm going to do a join between user ID and user ID here. I'll do a join between role ID and role ID here. Please don't play any music there, please. You're disturbing me. So now, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want role ID. I want role name. I don't want this as well. But I need to filter this stored procedure by my user ID. So let me pick the user ID here. So I filter here, I type in at user ID. I don't want it to be output. So I don't want this ID here to be output. So I click OK now. So the query I've generated says create procedure, get user roles at user ID int, that's the input parameter, as select roles dot role name from users in roles, inner join users on users in roles dot user ID equals user dot user ID inner join roles on users in roles dot role ID equals roles dot role ID, where users in roles dot user ID is equal to add user ID. I click on pass to check the definition of the stored procedure, and since everything is fine, I click on execute. Now I go back to Radzen. I click on data. I click on data. I make sure that under my fast settings, everything here is selected. Consistent procedures is selected. So I click on a fast schema. Now you can see stored procedures is not selected here. So I'll select stored procedure, even select views because it might make use of views later on. So I click on finish. Go to my application, click on it again. So I say run. Says there is an error. So let's click on stop. Says the error is occurring on (4482) of add user dot it say cannot convert from int to string. So let's look at what the error is. So the first error occurred on edit user.tracer page on line 44,82. So I'll go to Visual Studio. I'll open edit user.tracer. I'll go to line 44.82. Now this error, you can see right now, chip ID is a text box. This error occurred because of the changes that I made to the database schema, where I made the chip ID a foreign key in the users table. Now to resolve this issue, I'll be deleting add user page. Click OK. I'll be deleting edit user page. I'll click OK. I'll be deleting users page. Click OK. So now I'll click on run. Now Radzen has successfully generated our code file again. So I'm going to stop Radzen. Now I go back to my C# code file. Now I'm going back to the definition for data service. I will click on the one generated by Radzen. Remember that the name of my stored procedure that I created was get user roles. Now I'll be looking for a method that looks like get get user roles. Now this is the default method that was generated by Radzen. I'm going to copy this line. What this line actually does is to call my stored procedure in the database. The stored procedure get user roles. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go to the custom class for my service layer. I'm going to say var rows is equal to new list of string. So I'm now going to say return rows. Sorry. I'm going to say return await tax dot from result rows. Await dot public facing task. Return await task dot from result rows. So the items is equal to context dot get user in rows dot from SQL raw and do that by importing entity framework call package. Execute this stored procedure and taking user ID as parameter. I'm not calling I queryable, just turning it to list. Now if items.any for each. Now what's the class of this? The class of this items list is get user row. So for each get user row item in items. If not string dot is null or empty, item dot row name. Rows dot add item dot row name. So that ends the implementation of our Moik get rows list method. Now I go back to login.razor.cs. Now I'm going to check if any row was returned. How do I do that? I'm going to say if rows list.any. So if row list was found, I'm going to store row list inside my session manager. So I'm going to type something that looks like this. Await session storage dot set item async rows list. So now C# complains. The C# compiler says the name session storage does not exist in the current context. So let's fix that. Now, in order for me to fix this issue, somewhere in the definition of this login.razor class, I'm going to type in something like this: inject, and I'll say a session storage variable whose type is iSession storage service. I'm going to undo this red error by importing using Blazor session storage. Then for the inject attribute, I will undo it by importing Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.components. So now I've stored the user rows in rows list. Then the next thing, store user ID inside session manager. So I'm going to say await session storage dot set item async user ID, and that will be my my user dot user ID. Store username inside session manager. Sorry, this one is user ID, and this one will be username. User dot username. I need to store the team ID as well. So store team ID. Inside session manager. So await session storage dot set item async team ID. My user dot team ID. Now the next thing is for us to mark user as authenticated. Now in order for us to do that, we start something like this. Await custom authentication state provider, mark user as authenticated. Now we undo the red lines by importing Microsoft.esp.net core.components.authorization package. Then we'll undo this by importing this. Now there's still an issue here. Sorry. Let me remove the two imports for now. Oh, excuse me. Let me remove the one that has to do with authorization. Okay. So I've imported Soccer League transfer app.data. So that one takes care of the red line for this. Now, in order for me to undo this, I'll go somewhere in my login class. So I'll go somewhere in my login class, and I'm going to type the following. Inject authentication state provider get set. So it is now that I'll now import my Microsoft.esp.net core component authorization package. So finally, here we've marked user as authenticated. Now, on this line, we are checking if any rows was returned. What if any row was not returned? if no row was returned. That will be handled by an else. Now, to handle the use case that no row was returned, we are going to call notification service. Say notification service dot notify notification severity dot error. The summary will be no role assignment. The error message will be you are a valid application user, but you have not been assigned any role. Please contact system admin. The duration of the message should be 5 seconds. Let me save this. Now, the next use case we shall be handling is in a situation where user was not found in data store. If user was not found in data store, so this section is handling if when user is found in data store. So we will handle the use case for user not found in data store by implementing an else statement here. And the else statement will just be simply notification service dot notify notification security dot error summary login failure. The detail will be invalid username or password. Display this as well for 5,000 milliseconds, that is 5 seconds. There is still one piece of business to handle. Now, the piece of business that we are going to handle is that after user has been authenticated, what default page should the application take the user to? So let's go back to Radzen and vote for a page. So we are going to vote for a page that every user of this application should have access to. Okay. let's vote for the players list. So we are going to tell the application to navigate to players list after successfully logging in, after successfully authenticating a user. So the next thing we are going to say, the final piece of business here is, we are going to say redirect authenticated user to players list page. How do we do that? We are going to say URI helper dot navigate to players. Now that we've done that, let's go back to Radzen. Let's click run. Code generation is successfully done. But instead of Radzen taking us to login page, it's taking us to club details page. Now, how do we undo this issue? Now, to undo this issue, we are going to stop Radzen for now. We go to C#, that's Visual Studio, sorry. Let's open club details page, club details list page. We'll open the C# code file for it. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here will be to inject my authentication state provider. I'm going to import esp.net code and component.realization. Then I'll go to inject. I'll undo the issue with the inject attribute. I'll import esp.net code or components. I have method to get user status. First order of business, get user authentication state. I'll fix that. If user is authenticated, do nothing. If user is not authenticated, force user to go back to login page. Now, to round up everything, what do we do? Let's go back to our login.razor.cs. We have a method called sign-in user. So I'll go to login page. I'll click on outline. I'll go to form 0. I'll go to events. I'll undo the submit event by clicking event handler. I'll click on plus. Under action type, I'll say execute C#. And I'm going to call this method sign-in user. So I'll say await sign-in user. Then I say done. As for the cancel button, okay, I've already undo that. So fine. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'll go to club details page in Radzen. Go to club details page in Radzen. I want to make modification to the load event. So I'll click on the event handler. I click on the plus button. Now the new empty event handler that I've just added, I'll move it up. Action type, I'll change it to execute C#. And the C# code I want to execute this time around this, check user status. So I'm going to say await check user status. Say done. Let me save everything I have in C#. Now let me run my application. I'll say run. Still taking me to club details. Club details. Club details. Club details. Okay. Club details. And I'm executing my check user status stuff. So let's do a bit of debugging. Okay, okay, so let's put a breakpoint here. So let's run in Visual Studio. Let's stop what we are running in Radzen. Okay. The breakpoint is it. Function F10. Or F10. Okay. So this is where the issue is. All right, so I've debugged and this is where the issue is. So I'm going to fix this now. So this is the line that is giving us issues. If user state dot identity is authenticated. So I'm changing that line to if user state dot user dot claims dot any. Do nothing. Else if user is not authenticated, force user to go back to login page. So let's run again in Visual Studio. So the breakpoint that I've set on club details page is it. So function F10. Does user have any claim? No claim. So user is forced back to login page. Sweet. Now in my database, I've created a new user. The name of that user is Arsene Wenger, and the password is Professor. Username is Arsene Wenger, password is Professor. And I've created an entry for this user in my users in rows table. The user ID of Arsene Wenger is 1, the role ID is 3. That is a club manager. So now on my login page. Okay, let's set breakpoint for login as well. Come to login.razor. Let's set breakpoint in the sign in user method. So type Arsene Wenger. And our password will be Professor. So I click login. So our breakpoint is it. So F10, function F10. Press function F11 to inspect my validate user method. Let's check the user 1 property. So count is 1. Found Sewenga. Now the ID of the user returned is 1. That's sweet. Function F10. Function F11 to inspect this custom method in the service layer. We call the stored procedure. The stored procedure returns an item count as role name club manager. So this added to the roles list. Okay, role was found. So put that in session storage. Put user ID, session storage. Put team ID, session storage. Let's inspect the mark user as authenticated method as well. Function F11. So username Sase Wenger. Role names, role list as a count of 1. Okay. So it marks user as authenticated. Let's see. So it goes to players page. So we have come to the end of the lesson on implementing the login page. Thank you for watching.